Justyna Walker. She did incredible thing as an activist. We're blaming certain key organizations for current chaos in the world, and single-handedly, Justyna got herself in onto meetings of organizations like World Health Organization, World Economic Forum in Davos, and to absolute surprise, she had two speaking slots on meeting of United Nations in Geneva. Justyna, how did you manage to do that?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I guess it's a little bit of a journey because for the last 3 years we've been trying to do different ways and approaches on how to get our voice through. And so with the things kind of getting less restricted, if we would say it, over the last month, I looked at it from a perspective of what we can do different, because we're clearly not having enough impact on the stuff that is happening. But also, do we try to engage? Do we try to get into the belly of the beast, as we call it? Have we ever really done it over the last 2 years? I could with certainty say most of the time we just, we go on, we demand, we protest, we do our stuff, but we never really go into the belly of the beast. So since last year, we've kind of discussed it with some other activists around Europe, what is the approach that we can take? And I guess it started with something that was called a health summit that took place in September last year, and that took place in Berlin. This was the first time that the health organization opened the doors for people to actually come and be able to participate in their conference in such a way that you could buy yourself a ticket and go inside and for 3 days take part in the WHO conference. There were loads of different people there. There was, of course, the head of the WHO. There was I believe Macron was supposed to be there, but in the end he didn't come. But there was Scholz from Germany and loads of other people. Of course, all the organizations that are connected through finances, which are very often called stakeholders, were there. And this would be Bill Gates' foundation. This would be all the other foundations that put lots and lots of money into the stuff. And this was the first time we managed to kind of, as an activist or people who have a little bit of a different point of view, as we call it, than them, take part and see from the inside how the WHO and the other organizations actually work. Are they as strong as we think? Are there any people that think similar to us, or is it all just one narrative? Is it just all going one way? So I myself, together with Margareta Gris-Brisson, she's a German doctor, she lives in the UK, we took it upon our shoulders and we went into that meeting. It was very refreshing because we very often talk about what they announce, but this time what happened is we were actually inside. We were able to talk to people and see whether all of them feel the same, whether they all believe in having one great good health for the whole planet and people and animals, or whether there are people who actually, whether there are cracks in their system. So that was the starting point of it. After 2 years of doing protest conferences and stuff, I thought this is the way to go forward, just to see whether we can try to find somebody who will listen to what we say, because we're not really being heard. The media doesn't listen to what we say. We're being branded loads of different names. We're being sometimes treated as we are the villains in the world, trying to, do the bad for the world, not the good. And that was the starting point. And going off from that, I thought, well, let's go with it. Let's do the next step. The next step on the road was the World Economic Forum. And it was with the World Economic Forum that I guess it's very similar stuff. we very often hear that this is a closed up organization and you cannot get inside, and only if you are, very rich and so on, you are able to do it. But is it really? Do we actually go? Do we actually protest there? This year we've seen guys from one of the TVs, showing up there at the Rebel News, and they did get to speak to some of the people who are there. The reality of the World Economic Forum is totally different than we think. It's not like that you cannot get these people on the street. You cannot talk to them. There are actually events happening there all week, and you are absolutely 100% it is that you're going to meet someone. I mean, I've literally saw Blair walking down the street 3 times with his bodyguards. There was nothing stopping me from walking to him and having a discussion if I wanted to do so. But I think we have a little bit of not a great awareness of what these people are doing, because we tend to talk about them a lot, and yet we assume a lot. They're not as well coordinated, they're not as well organized as we think, and in a way sometimes we make them bigger than they are. I saw loads of cracks being at the World Economic Forum event. Loads of people who are not really there because they believe in some global agenda, but actually they're there because they want to make a business and make money. And to be honest, if tomorrow the head of the WHO would finish his livelihood, they would just keep on going with the business. They're not really that much interested with, all the global agenda. They're more interested in pulling the money from underneath the rest of the WHO, the World Economic Forum. And so going on this, I've also applied to take part in online, but not only, in person conferences and events that are taking part. And some of these, of course, the WHO, I have till now been rejected for most of these. They have not let me in. However, there is one they've actually approved me to take part in, which is happening at the end of this month. I don't believe I will be able to fly over to Geneva because this is where these meetings are taking place, but I'll probably take part on online. In the meantime, there was something that a lot of us in the activism circles didn't pay attention to, and it brings me to another thing. We don't actually follow that much of what is happening or coming, rather than we react after something is announced or happens, and then we throw out all this information and we give it to people and we get all upset, but we don't actually have any work that we do before the stuff get announced or happen. I mean, we see this with the treaty that is taking place. We don't see a lot of coverage, even though the treaty that the WHO is creating is being worked at. We've seen this with the IHR amendments, which are the health amendments, which would potentially also have a big impact once the changes in these would happen. And so with the United Nations workshop that I was a part of, that was a very interesting one, because last year the countries have met together and they have discussed stuff about, well, how about it should be time now to discuss the last 2 years. What is the impact? And what they called it was a workshop on promoting and protecting economic, I mean, it sounds, protecting economic and social and cultural rights within the context of addressing inequities in the recovery from, the last 2 years and what happened in the last 2 years. Now, this was not an event that most of the countries wanted to take place, because they've actually voted last year, and this took place between the February and August last year. There was a general vote done between 50 odd countries, And the idea was, do we need to look at the last 2 years? Do we really have to look and see what happened after what were the positives and negatives of the decisions made by the government and by the health ministers, etc. So, I mean, to my surprise, I believe 14 countries voted against doing this workshop. And 32 or 31 countries voted for it. Of course, by default, more countries voted to have this discussion and less, 14 didn't. In these 14 countries, we do find the UK, we found Switzerland, Luxembourg, United States, France. So all these countries that believe to be, you know, more up to date with medical and sociological and economical advances, they didn't even want to discuss what happened over the last 2 years, whether we should look at positives and negatives. They didn't want to do it. But most of the countries from Asia and from Africa wanted to have it. Therefore, this resolution was done, which was the resolution 49/19, which requested that such workshop must take place. And it did. It took place last week. It was a 3 days workshop. There were people from different countries. There was a representative of the United Kingdom. I did not get a chance to speak with him. He spoke, I believe, on the first or second day, because what happened is this was all divided into different parts, and each part was discussing human rights, as all of it was done by the Human Rights Commission. Now, weird thing about it is that a lot of people in the human rights area, they totally understand that some human rights were broken, as they call it, right? Were not followed. But it is very early days. Hearing it from some of the people on the panels who were panelists and they were there speaking, I did get the impression from one of the panelists who, for example, said that he believes that the Human Rights Commission is treated like an ugly sister. And even by the WHO, they are not taking their what the Human Rights Commission is saying in regards to breaking human rights while we're making new treaties, or we're making resolutions, or we're making amendments to existing health regulations. So there are voices in the Human Rights Commission that say it looks like the WHO really is not looking at the human rights while they're doing all this stuff. But yet they don't have such a big voice to like push the WHO to do it. For people who don't kind of grasp it, WHO is just one branch of UN. Human Rights Commission is another, and so on and so on. So this big.
So are they, to help people understand, are they advisory body or they're executive body? What's the difference between?
With the Human Rights Commission, as we know, they're kind of split in parts. There's also separate stuff, which is the Human Rights Court. So they have some sort of power, I would say, over the decision making. But it does seem that when we take something like a new treaty that is being done, their expertise as the ones who should be technically taken as experts from human rights is not really being listened to. And I think that's where the problem is. Human rights is a massive subject because, it's not going to only be the medical rights, which we're looking at for the last 2 years, right? But, they've also got other stuff like, I'm not even going to go into details, but as they call it, social, economical, etc. So they look at gender and they look at women's rights, etc., etc. So they got quite a big scope of stuff that they look at. With this workshop, what happened is all the information that was said by the panelists was not for them just to sit there and talk. But after the panelists spoke, and this is for, like I said, this was divided into different sessions. So there's a morning session, an afternoon session, and then the next day the same thing, and the day after the same thing. So we had 6 sessions ongoing over the course of 3 days. But after each panelist speech and discussion, the member states so that will be the representatives of the country, were able to have a 2-minute and have their voice heard. As NGO, which is a non-governmental organization, and this is the capacity I was there as, I also asked for 2 minutes, and I was granted that 2 minutes twice, once on the second day and then once on the third day. And what I tried to put forward was, I believe you'll be able to play it in a bit.
Yeah, actually, I just uploaded, so I will play this now.
Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues, I'm pleased to open the 5th thematic session of the workshop on promoting and protecting economic, social and cultural rights within the context of addressing inequalities in the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to welcome and give the floor to the moderator, Chief of Civil, Political, Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Section of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Van Hee Lee, who will introduce the panelists and moderate the discussion. Van Hee, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues. At this session, we're called upon to consider how to further strengthen the capacity of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to better operationalize economic, social, and cultural rights. Madam Minister, Councillor, I give the floor to the Verax Foundation.
Panelists, thank you for this opportunity. I'm actually really grateful we were able to come to this workshop about discussion, but it's very difficult to the perception of these inequalities in context of North and South is so much different. It's very different, and I think it's really hard to draw comparisons. But after the last 3 years, we do need to look back at and reassess the quality control after actual review being done. So whether all the measures that were put in place, all the public health management was considered, all the principles of the good practice, medical practice in terms of risks assessments and the human rights. I think what we were trying to look at as an organization is that we do need to consider all the costs and not exclude the things that were not related. This includes the impact of decisions taken by the governments and the ripple effects of both positive and negative things that took place over the last 3 years. So as an example, for currently the number of people in England waiting for planned hospital care will hit 10.7 million by March 2024. And this is a projection that's been prepared for the ministers and the NHS. This number was prior to the pandemic at about 5 million. May 2020, the Central Statistic Office for Poland published a report showing that there were difficulties in accessing health services, both outpatient care and hospitalization during the pandemic. And as far as Poland is concerned at this point, we were among 20 countries in the world that account of 80% of the world's population, global number of access deaths during COVID pandemic. Of this group, we ranked second from the end in terms of population. So the statistics really shows that we had an excess of over 200,000 excess deaths, and this were non-COVID related. We did not get the primary care access. So we do need a proper after-action review, because it is a principle of good quality management, good quality control in context of the economic, social, and the cultural rights. Maybe taking that approach to measure that, implement, and looking into the impact on the individual as well. Basic principle of leaving no one behind speaks of, on some level, about focusing on assessing if policies, social practices and recommendations do not discriminate people and the right holders, but also not to leave particular groups of people further behind in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so maybe I'll put it into layman's terms a little bit. When I was getting that speech prepared, I actually took advice of lawyers and economists. I did have a brief chat with Philippe Kruse, who is one of the main lawyers for Switzerland, And he is doing remarkable work because for the last 2 years, he is really one of the main ones who's standing up and saying about how badly people have been treated. Now, what we did is we kind of put it in a language that for for a lot of people might not be understood, but the panelists definitely understood it. And after this speech, the 2 minutes, I actually had few people in the panel looking at me a little bit terrified what I'm saying. Why am I telling publicly that 200,000 people have lost their lives, but not because of what has been happening the last 2 years, as they claim, but because they did not get enough access to their NHS. Well, in Poland, it's the equivalent of NHS. So I was giving the numbers from Poland, and that we've actually done a lot of damage by putting lots of restrictions, making priority on patients with specific stuff that we know that was so pushed over the last 2 years, but yet we left people unattended with other diseases or other medical problems, like people who had stroke, people who had problems with, I don't know, cancer patients, and so on and so on. Also, pushing in the information about the NHS in the UK. I mean, we are quite aware now that prior to the last 2 years, we had a waiting lists in the UK, which was about 5 million patients waiting for medical care. Now what we've got is this has hit 10.7 million. I mean, it doubled over the last 2 years. This is unheard of. And we're talking about people who are waiting to get, specific meeting with doctor because maybe they broke their hand and they need a physio and they're waiting months for it just to find out that the bone, has healed the wrong way and the hand has to be broken again and so on and so on. So the way I've kind of worded was on the advice of, having that discussion with the lawyers, pushing them into putting it on record, because that stuff that has been said during these last 3 days will be put together in a report. And this specific report will be presented to at the 54th meeting, which is their General Human Rights Council meeting. That's, I believe, is happening in August or September this year. And I think there were not many. I mean, I think I was the only voice that was saying, look, we're all talking about the last 2 years and lockdowns and restrictions, but are we talking about how much damage these decisions by the government have actually made? So after the speech, there was a break, and I had few people coming in to me, and it was quite interesting because they were coming up and saying, "Well done, great job. It's okay. That's great that you said it publicly." Not a lot of people have,
There is that
courage.
one thing that you being independent, you could say certain things, while most people, they just got their jobs position where they need to stick to some frames of political correctness, or basically we got politics
Sure.
at play. So you were not tied to this, and you could just speak your mind.
Yeah, and I mean, it was the first time I did it. I mean, I hope I will have a chance to go again for another meeting for the UN to say it. I will definitely be more direct next time. I didn't want to put myself in a position where they will throw me out straight away, because it took, quite a bit of work to get in there. And also something that you said, state members, which is the representatives of the countries, these are the people that got the jobs with the government. They're being given that 2 minutes, and then they read it, and then they say what they're told to say. Whether with an NGO like myself, I'm independent and I don't have that, boss over me to tell me what I'm able to say or what I'm not able to say. So this was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that goes on record while I am there, because I think it's very important that we start talking about human rights, but in a way that we say, okay, we've been fighting, we've been telling you we are pro-choice, we don't want to have stuff, we don't want to be told that we must take some stuff, we want to have a choice whether we're able to do it. But while you are restricting our choice of not taking something, you are also breaking my human right in that way that you're not letting me get on a plane. You're not letting me go to a specific place. You are, increasing anxiety, depression, and we see these numbers. We see these numbers in kids. We see a massive, wave of depression in youngsters. And a lot of it is because of the decisions that have been made by the governments, different governments, whether it is the government in the UK or in Poland or in Germany or in France.
I will play second clip. So that was about excess deaths in Poland and about toll of government intervention, of lockdowns. The second one was about economical aspect, like tax avoidance. Yeah. So
Yep.
I will play that clip now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Excellencies, distinguished participants, I'm pleased to open the fourth thematic session of the workshop on promoting and protecting economic, social and cultural rights within the context of addressing inequalities in the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to welcome and give the floor to the moderator, Chief of Development and Economic and Social Issues Branch of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Todd Howland, who will introduce the panelists and moderate the discussion. Moderator, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues, good afternoon. I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Varex Foundation, Ms. Justyna Walker.
Justyna. It's Justyna. Yes, it is. Okay, thank you. So we're talking about investing and spending, but where does that money actually come from? Above all, how do we make sure that it actually goes to those who really need it, who need it the most? Because let's be honest, in many cases, some of the governments are not doing the greatest job. And how do we know that? February is bringing strikes across different sectors in the UK, for example. Teachers, nurses, train drivers are going to be out on the street. And at the same time, the government is looking at amendment of public order bill, which will impact the right to assemble in various ways. In Greece, we saw and are seeing some demonstrations, and protests are increasing because the prices are increasing, but the wages are not. EAPN Poverty Watch in Poland, the report that just came in, states that the extreme poverty in Poland, and this is the data for the year 2021, has slightly decreased, but unfortunately the forecast for the next year is already alarming because people cannot afford the bills. And yesterday we've heard a proposal about implementing global wealth tax of 0.5% on the people whose wealth exceeds $2 million US. But I'm just going to throw a couple of numbers that were not mentioned here, and this will be billionaires and big corporations, which has been mentioned before. Oxfam's report in January states that the billionaires' fortunes are increasing by 2.7 billion a day. Taxing people with 2 million's wealth would raise about 337 billion, but implementing tax up to 5%, which was suggested by Oxfam, on the world's multi-millionaires and billionaires would actually raise 1.7 trillion a year. Now, that would be enough for 2 billion people to be taken out of the poverty. The richest 1%, as the statement from Oxfam, has grabbed nearly 2/3 of all the new wealth created since 2020. And this is almost twice as much money as the bottom 99%. And clearly we are that 99%, the ordinary people that make the sacrifices of daily essentials like food or petrol and are being asked for further sacrifices, while that gap between the poorest and the rich is getting bigger by 2.7 billion a day. So with big corporations like British Petroleum, the profit this year has been 27.7 billion, Shell 32.2. Pfizer's revenue was over 100 billion. Banks reported enormous profits, and therefore why are we not taxing that 1% richest and these biggest corporations? The system that we needs to funnel the money organically from the top of that pyramid all the way to the bottom. Thank you.
Thank you, Justyna Walker. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative.
Again, well done on getting on the speakers panel. That's a change of paradigm as well, because we seems to be kind of stuck in the same way. And we know each other from 2020. We've met each other on protests. You were involved in organizing first UK protests. And we were discussing this time and time again, like how can we solve that situation? And you're constantly, like myself, looking for solution. There is, I think we both share disappointment with politics, and first of all, it's like apathy of people not wanting to engage in politics, and then if we actually engage, like effectiveness of those actions, and then like those direct actions with those organizations who are at helm of those events. That was really smart approach. So what you're thinking we can do aside of protest, just contesting, how can we create alternative for this system?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because the last 2 years, like you said, we've been on the streets, we've been marching, we've been saying, we've been shouting, we've been trying to plead with people, but again, it all kind of falls on deaf ears. Today, we're in a position where, just this winter, people could barely afford bills. The government throws a little bit of money at you, to help you with your bills, etc. And what we're hearing, and even what I've heard over there with the Human Rights Commission, is that the approach of the government is to put more austerity on the people. And that is something they don't agree with, of course. I get it. I totally understand. I also don't agree with putting more austerity in place and more, squeezing the belt, as we say it. They really want to make people consume less and, travel less, walk more, let's save the planet, great. But this expectation is always coming down to the people on the ground. From, even from the numbers that I kind of pushed there, it's quite obvious who's getting rich. It's quite obvious who's actually getting all the money. I mean, if the gap between an ordinary person like myself or you is the 2.7 billion a day, because that is what the wealthy people are getting richer by day, and we are being told, try to, I don't know, light a candle instead of putting the heating on. And we hear things like Boris at some point coming out and saying, buy a new kettle. It's ridiculous stuff. So I think the first solution is we definitely need to start saying no, which we have been, but at the same time, we need to create more system on the side. We need to have our own way of approaching communities, and whether it is barter or whether it is, knowing people around where you are, local. But at the same time, we should not be, feeding the beast, which is the government, all the officials that are sitting in Parliament that are talking to us from up there, telling us that it's really difficult, we all must do it together. Well, I mean, we mustn't do it all together, because clearly they are still flying their jets. They are still creating, as they call it, the carbon footprint, which is much bigger than ours. I mean, looking at the numbers, the most, everybody's fixated now on saving the planet, but no one's really talking about the fact that the biggest carbon footprint is being created by the first 100 biggest companies in the world. So it is again the same problem that we've got. It is the people on the ground that are being asked to, try and live less and use less stuff and be less, while the other ones, like we're talking about BP here or Shell, that had enormous revenue and earnings this year and the last year, in what we're hearing on TV, in comparison what we're seeing in numbers, where what these people are earning and these organizations and these companies, we are now suddenly having loads of philanthropists, that, as they call themselves, giving the money to save the humanity. Well, where did they get that money from? Because clearly they got it first by squeezing us. So I think the solutions are very simple. Solutions are, if we know that they've been squeezing people from the bottom, which is that 99% of us that we call it, and we've heard it many times on the street, we are the 99%, then it's the time that the 99% take it back from that one, because there is a big, disproportion in the distribution of wealth. So if we start from the squeeze of the 1%, we pull as much as we can from underneath them, because that should be the case. But also we should look at the people that we got in power today, and we shouldn't forget about what decisions they made over the last 2 years. We should not forget about taking responsibility for their decisions and the actions, and definitely start focusing on, creating our own media if we're not being led to the mainstream, because that's what we see on many occasions, even though we still have this focus now on protesting in front of the places like the BBC and making sure that they know that we see what they're doing. We have to keep pushing, and that's the main thing that we do. But make sure that we create our own businesses. We're getting further and further away from them. We're getting more and more independent, because sooner or later this system will crumble. Whether people like it or not, it will. We cannot keep building on, something that is already broken and rotten from underneath.
Talking about media, I'm just checking chat, and question popped in about Rebel News. Can Rebel News be trusted, though? Seems like a setup. I will say one thing, and I will let you speak your mind about media, because I think we've got something to say, because we experienced this censorship firsthand, and as well from perspective of like you being organizer and actually trying to get your message across, and like me from perspective of independent journalist who was there. We got like two different perspectives. So I will start. First thing, I think in the whole situation, we need to take responsibility for everything. And sadly, in some sense, we allowed this situation to build up, because we handed that responsibility to what I called daddy government, and we tolerated this for too long, and it grew too strong and become tyrannical. If we would be more engaged in direct democracy, then if we would be maybe more passionate about this politics and what is going on, perhaps we wouldn't have such a massive hijack. And now we've got a situation like Rebel News. So Rebel News, like, to me, seems to, they're doing job, like if you would look on the early media, they are doing this. I think for me, like, they're like too sensational. They need to get their views on the base of sensational content. That's why they need to like hound the VIPs, hound people like Borla, etc. But then, on one hand, as much as I understand, it's venting. It's not giving us a good name out there. And then, if you think everything needs funding, and like properly funded media. Even we got this recent conversation about GB News in UK. GB News seems to be competition for likes of BBC, but they can't match the infrastructure, equipment, funding. So they're more like the publicists. So they got certain programs, but they're not out there on the street. So what Rebel News is doing, they are trying to reach out to people. So that's a good thing about them. But if you understand that now every media, when they will be sponsored, then eventually the sponsor will have their say. So like with GB News, we see this newest development. One of their journalists, Mark Stein, went off sick with a, I think he had a heart attack. When he came back off sick due to his controversial subjects, he was GB News was basically fined by Ofcom. And GB News wanted to enforce a new contract on Mark Stein as provider, on which he will have to bear the cost of fine. So if he would say something which isn't politically correct, then it wouldn't be broadcaster, which is GB News, that will pay the fine. It will be individual journalist. So when we think like who can bear fine of tens of thousands of pounds for not being politically correct, this can't really happen. And then if we don't have well-funded organization, then we are also partly to blame because we're not supporting alternative for neither government, for media, and we've got what we've got. So when you got individual private sponsor, let's say GB News or Rebel News, effectively, at certain point you might see things, or you might see certain things being redacted. That's sadly effect of people not sponsoring those stations. So how can we have independent media when they need to, let's say, make a living, and people who want independent content don't want to sponsor this? It's catch-22. That's in my opinion. Off to you, Justyna, what you're thinking about development of media. What's your view on this?
I mean, I agree that the issue we've got at the moment is for the first year, we've had, loads and loads of people coming and doing live feeds, showing stuff. And then on top of that, what we've had is created, some of the people started creating outlets. Some of that TVs kind of went mega huge. I mean, Highwire was one of these, and they're still doing a pretty good job, I think, from what I see. We had the Rebel News, but and then like GB and etc. But then I guess after the 2 years, we kind of need to like evaluate what we really need. If we are looking at the media like Rebel News, yes, we see that they're looking for sensational stuff, right? So their TV is built up on, grabbing someone like Bola or someone like, Blair or whatever, or Greta, etc., and kind of ambushing them and asking them questions. But really, okay, it's a great TV for people who like to get upset, meaning, yeah, you've got them and so on. But what is the outcome of this? Because I'm looking at all of this from now perspective of 2 years. Like we had a lot of amazing protests, we had a lot of amazing venues and events. I mean, I myself was responsible for creating a massive protest in Brussels, which you came to, and it was a huge European protest last year in February. But at the time, they threw all the force of police and everything they had just to not let it happen. Then later on, of course, in media, we were shown as total lunatics, people who go around and burn the city, which it wasn't us anyway, but that's how the media was spinning it. So the question is, after 2 years of trying to do protesting, being there on the street, is our impact now with shouting, screaming, and having this wow effect, right? Like the Rebel News, is it bringing us anywhere? Is it actually, what is the goal? What are we achieving with it? Because if it's supposed to be just an entertainment TV, then great. I mean, that's probably what it's doing. But there is nothing that we are actually getting out of it. So I think what we're only doing is, yes, they are getting donations, they're getting money to be running and going, but is it an entertainment TV, or are we really achieving anything? Have we got our rights back? Has this got us somewhere where we've actually been heard? I don't know. I mean, I've seen a couple of things about one of the reporters from the Rebel News, and I believe he's the Australian guy. He said that the case against him was dropped. Now, whether was it dropped because of his work, or was it dropped because actually the governments are rolling back on what they've done? These are the little things that we need to look at. So I think going forward, what we need is media that will be actually helping us to achieve the change, to achieve the goal, in a way, because that's what we're missing. As far as I understand, there is a project going, and this is Highwire that is probably going to be a part of it. I saw Peterson's talking about him being in London at the end of the year, and that they were starting or some sort of a big project, and media will also be involved in it. That is more of a solution-based activism, which I think we're missing at the moment. We're missing the solution-based activism, which actually gets us to achieving the goal. And the goal is keeping our human rights, keeping our ability to decide about ourselves, in the medical capacity, in our capacity to be able and free to assemble. Because that's another, right that might disappear as we're looking at the bill, right, that is going through in UK. And these are the things that we must focus. Yes, first year we were okay with going and shouting and saying we don't agree. But after 2 years of this, and now walking into a third year, I think we should learn a little bit. We're not the toddler, we're not the children. We're more of a toddlers, but actually going into, a little bit of a bigger activism kid. We have to change the way we approach stuff, and also the media that we have. We really have to look at the media that is what type of a media is actually showing us, and how, because there mustn't be straight away put into that side of a crazy, dangerous people. Because if we're connected to crazy, dangerous, then no one will ever speak to us. We will not be seen by other people, and people will not think that we are a part of a solution, not a problem, as they say it, right? Because the crazy global stuff agenda will be like, yeah, they're crazy. We must put in the misinformation stuff on there. They must. We don't want to do that. We really need to start having people that do media in a way that we bring people to us, so they see that we're trustworthy. We're not just crazy loonies running behind people and trying to get them to, I don't know what to do, really.
Everybody is looking for individual solutions. I think there's 3 areas, and we were discussing this before this conversation, that influence society. The first one is politics itself. Then there's economy, and we see that government and certain public institutions were actually hijacked through economical influence, and then this was done with the help of mass media. So those 3, they are instrumental to the way how the society functions. So mass media, economy, and politics. Being realistic, I was really impressed what you've done over the last actually 3 years, and how you evolved, and you moved into new direction. Because again, I'm still advocating for protests, because protests, they are part of democracy.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm not I've never changed my mind, but one of my disappointments is that I don't understand how come we could have 1 million people protesting on the street of London and have no political party, especially that all those people, they are perfectly aware that those parties that are in power at the minute, they don't represent the interests of normal people, common people. So why don't we fund and create alternative? And that goes for everything, for non-governmental organization, for activism, for independent media, or alternative political party. It all needs funding. And that's like my pet hate with so-called freedom movement, where people are just constantly throwing names on each other. They're arguing, they're calling everybody controlled opposition, but then they're ending up buying their, I say, Coca-Colas, McDonald's, and sponsoring this oppressive regime. But when somebody propose any solution, they will have problem for every solution. It's utterly frustrating for me. And as much as I despise politics, then I would rather I'd like to see some solutions proposed, not just venting, shouting, being agitated with everything what's going on. When we're just protesting, we are just deferring certain things, but we're not producing alternative by default. So just protesting against something is not building up something or better system, better alternative. So that's why I wanted to introduce Justyna. She really focused last 1.5 year on activism in Poland. She was mostly broadcasting to a Polish audience, and she did a fantastic job. While even certain mass protests, I would say, they didn't make such a reach or like representation in those seemingly inaccessible bodies like UN, WHO, WEF. So we need to brainstorm more. We need ingenuity, and we know this from communistic times in Poland. Ingenuity and humor, and then the whole solidarity movement was based on activists thinking, and they basically conquered massive odds. So I don't think we've got. I'm positive about future, but then we need to really support people. So, with what you're doing, Justyna, how can we support? How can people help? Or how can people engage and do same things like you're doing? If you can talk us through, give us some food for thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is so many opportunities to get yourself engaged in it. I mean, I know a lot of people more get engaged in their local communities. That's always a way forward. I'm more of a non-political way, I think, approach person. Honestly, looking at all of this from the perspective of these years and the last months that I've kind of changed and went to, how about we go into the belly of the beast, because we can't keep shouting, oh, you're bad, but we're actually not shouting it in their faces. I've kind of looked at there are many opportunities. I mean, in March in London, there is a Health Cities event. At the moment, there is no ability to get inside. However, for media outlets, of course there is. So as we were talking here about the GB or outlets like this is an opportunity for them to request a press pass and go inside. This is something that is being organized by Sadiq Khan. The mayors of different cities will be coming to London for this event. Whether we are able to have our voice inside as a press or whether not we are not able, we could also roll back into the protesting outside. This is something that they're implementing. They're talking about one of their SDGs, right? So they're talking about the sustainable development goals, which is the part of the UN agenda, and they want to make these healthy cities. As we know, we've seen the approach of the healthy cities in Oxford and other cities, how this is rolling out, and not everybody's happy with that. So I think there is always an opportunity to engage, whether it is, if you cannot go inside, outside, but also we very often miss that. As an example, I'll give the WHO event that happened in September. I mean, I approached the German activist and said, look, we've got all these big names coming to your city in Berlin. I mean, you've got it coming to your country, to Berlin. And there was nobody willing to go and actually make a protest, make that stand in front of that hotel, which is, it's terrible. We talk a lot about how bad these people are, but yet when they come to our ground or they show up, or where we are, we're not there. So we cannot then shout and say that they don't listen to us, because we have not made an effort to show up and stand up and be there at the right time. So such an event is happening. This is, for example, the 15th of March in London. I guess for any organizations that are UK based, there is a plenty of opportunity to create something just for that specific event. Otherwise, if people wish to support the efforts of my foundation, which is the Verax Foundation, I welcome anybody who's willing to, as we say, buy us a coffee. You can go to our website. It's www.verax.live, and you can find the information about us. We've created a very clean, as I call it, website to make it look very clean, which I guess in a way helped us get into these meetings for the last couple of months. We maybe don't look very suspicious. But the reality is we're not suspicious. We are just, an organization that is fighting for human rights in a different manner that they, in these organizations, perceive the human rights. For some of them, the human right is the right to have some sort of stuff being put into their vein. For me and the people that I work with, the freedom of choice and human right is to not have it put in my vein and yet be allowed the same stuff as others. I mean, we still have countries where I cannot fly only because I do not have a specific type of passport. And that should not be the case with 2-3 years in, and we still have to, have things like this. I don't think this is right. We shouldn't be restricted. We're Polish, so we both kind of know what happens when people get divided. It ends up really badly when one specific group of people is being treated differently. We've seen it, and try to make any comparisons historically, you will get put on a spike, as I said. So we avoid that, but I'm trying to find solutions. So yes, we would welcome any donations and financial support. That is amazing. But anybody who wishes to kind of go that path of going into the belly of the beast to have not a discussion, because we all know the discussions are almost impossible, but maybe trying to put through our point of view in a intelligent manner and a way. This is what I'm going to be doing. There are quite a few other events that are coming. I personally think we can do way more lobbying outside of the parliament, as far as, for example, UK Parliament, rather than going in as becoming a parliament members. I think there is a way bigger variety of kind of pushing on the parliamentary members that already are there or will be there, rather than becoming a parliament member yourself. I don't think a lot of people think that if we put our politicians in place, something will change. I think that what will work way better, that's my opinion, is being, a bit of a Chuck Norris. We're keeping them in rein. We're checking what they're doing. We're pushing on them. We're making sure that they don't do the wrong thing. That's my opinion. But hey, I welcome, your opinion that we should have somebody inside. Do I agree with it? I think we could do way more outside. The pressure of media that we don't have at the moment, but the pressure of people and media, if we go the right direction, can achieve way more than having a politician inside.
We definitely need way of pushing on politics, because recently we had a parliamentary review regarding medical device, which we call injectables, and we can't name it due to compelled speech on YouTube. And one of MPs who picked this fight was actually struck of being MP, which just shows you the level of censorship, and it's showing you who is actually playing the cards here. Andrew Bridgen was basically
Yeah.
head of parliamentary commission, and he took the case of injury due to medical treatment very seriously. And unfortunately for that, he was ostracized and he was struck as MP. So one way or another, I think the good analogy would be if we see the bus driver trying to drive the bus off the cliff. It's not good enough just to draw attention to what is going on. We also need to stop the driver. So any way of pressurizing the politicians and using media, using activism is very much needed. We need to engage in as many possible ways. I approach it from side of media and even those independent interviews or live streams. I'm doing something which privately funded media don't want to do it, or their sponsors will not allow them. And certain things like they're saying not noticed, like except for people who follow Justyna on her Facebook profile. The rest of people they can't see, and that was a big thing, like to have speaking slot at UN conference, and we need more of that. And that's a great example to give. If we have more people engaging, and there was that study that I keep referring to, that we need 3.5% of society to actively push back to balance the tyrannical government. We're not far off, because we had at least 1 million people on the streets already. 20 million people refused to bow into forced medical treatment. So I'm sure we've got those numbers. But the question is that it's not just about numbers. It's the crucial number is the number of activists, number of people like Justyna who are doing their thing to actually influence media, influence political machine, influence lawmakers. We need more of it. So I would like to help with this. I would like to speak with you again, Justyna, when you will have new projects, or if there is something that you would like to make people aware that there is public event, like you just mentioned, a meeting in London regarding 15 minutes cities rollout, so we can engage and just do something about this. That's a now lifestyle. We can't go back to sleep. I definitely can't see myself going back to pre-2020 ignorance. So we need to really engage heads on. So final thoughts, Justyna?
Yeah, and I think just the final thing is, I guess, looking for different approaches, opportunities, how to engage. I don't think we should stop protesting in a way. I absolutely believe in right to assemble, and I think this is one of the things that should never in any way be stricken off, because that's what we're looking at. I mean, we're looking at saying, oh, if you are protesting and you are a bit too aggressive, then you shouldn't have the right to do it. No. Well, the reason the aggression is so big, there is a reason behind it. So maybe what we should look at is why some of the protests are more and some are less aggressive. And this is my opinion. But opportunities come. These organizations are not beyond our reach. Surely we can not engage with them, because that's not the case, but we can make an impact. We cannot, what it allows us to do is, while we leave that, while we get in, we're able to leave a mark. Now, how are we going to leave that mark? Whether we're going to be portrayed as crazy, or whether we are going to be portrayed as someone who is, well, actually saying something that they do not want publicly to be heard, I guess that's the case. Well, once it's heard, sooner or later it will be in the media. Like with the case of UN, this is going to go onto a report. This will stay on the books of the UN, and it will be there for anybody else to find it in the future that such information has been said. So that's how I'm looking at it from now on. That doesn't mean, of course, that I will not be protesting or going to the protest. Maybe not organizing them at the moment, but definitely if a right protest with the right approach comes, I'll be there.
Justyna, if you can just repeat, I will put in chat, I will put the website of your foundation. That's Verax.
Yes, that's verax.live, Live, live.
That's okay. So I've just posted this on chat. Again, Justyna, thank you very much for your time. Let's stay in touch, and let's inform people on new development. It is challenging time to live, but then on the other hand, it is an exciting time to live. I think it's better to meet change heads on, because what will come at the end is like tsunami wave. Then it's too late to act. Our time to act is now, when the change is happening. We were facing historical change, and I think the most sensible thing to do is actually to meet the change heads on and just to act.
That's it, exactly. Thank you for tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.